The small frontier town of Redemption Creek had never seen a woman preacher before. Sarah Matthews arrived with her worn Bible and quiet determination. When the notorious Carson gang mocked her sermons and threatened her congregation, they had no idea their intimidation would lead to a fatal showdown. Now, standing in the dusty main street with the town watching from behind shuttered windows, Sarah faced the most feared gunslinger in the territory. And the gang was about to learn that faith and justice sometimes came from unexpected hands. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Matthews stood at her simple wooden pulpit in Redemption Creek's newly constructed church. The morning sunlight streaming through handcrafted windows her congregation had installed just weeks ago. After 10 years of bringing God's word to the most challenging frontier territories, she thought she'd seen every kind of resistance to her calling. But the scene unfolding before her tested even her unwavering faith. 6 members of the Carson gang lounged in the back pews, their spurs marking the polished wood floors, weapons prominently displayed. Their leader, James "Deadeye" Carson, hadn't joined them yet, but his men made their presence known through sneers and loud whispers designed to disrupt her sermon. Sarah maintained her steady voice as she addressed the nervous congregation. In times of trial, we must remember that courage often comes not from the strength of our arms, but from the conviction in our hearts. Her words carried clearly through the small church, just as they had in countless frontier settlements where she'd established congregations over the past decade. Behind her calm exterior, Sarah noted every detail of the gang's behavior with the same careful attention that had kept her alive during years of traveling alone through dangerous territories. The way they positioned themselves throughout the church, their subtle hand signals, the calculating looks they gave to certain members of her congregation. These weren't just common bandits looking to cause trouble. They were gathering information, assessing weaknesses. Sheriff Thomas Parker sat in the front row, his badge catching the morning light. She'd noticed his increasing tension over the past weeks as the Carson gang's presence in Redemption Creek grew stronger. The town had called for a lawman 6 months ago, hoping to establish order in their growing community. But even Sarah could see the young sheriff was outmatched by the sophisticated criminal operation taking root in their town. "Sister Matthews," one of the gang members called out, interrupting her sermon with exaggerated politeness. "Ain't you worried preaching might be too much responsibility for a woman? Seems like dangerous work out here in the territories." Sarah met his mocking gaze steadily. "The Lord's work knows no gender, Mr. Rhodes, as I'm sure your mother taught you before you chose your current path." A flash of something, recognition, perhaps even shame, crossed the man's face before he masked it with a harder expression. Sarah had learned during her years of ministry that even the most hardened outlaws often carried memories of faith and family. Sometimes those memories could be rekindled. Other times they only fueled deeper anger. Through the church's open windows, she heard approaching hoofbeats. The congregation tensed, recognizing the sound of multiple riders approaching. Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her belt, where a small derringer remained concealed beneath her modest black dress. The weapon was a reminder of her past, of skills learned long before she'd found her calling to ministry. Sheriff Parker turned slightly, catching her eye with a worried glance. They both knew what the approaching riders meant. James Carson was making his first appearance at her church service, and he wasn't coming alone. "Let us pray," Sarah announced calmly, buying time for her congregation to prepare themselves. As heads bowed, she watched the gang members through lowered lashes. Their previous amusement had been replaced by focused attention. Whatever Carson had planned, his men were now all business. The church doors swung open, flooding the interior with harsh sunlight. James Carson's imposing silhouette filled the doorway, his reputation for ruthless efficiency having preceded him to Redemption Creek. But it was the document in his hand that caught Sarah's attention. A legal paper that glinted with an official seal. "Don't let me interrupt your prayers, Sister Matthews." Carson's cultured voice carried none of his men's crude mockery. "But I thought your congregation might be interested in some earthly matters. Specifically, the matter of who owns this lovely church you've built." Sarah kept her expression neutral, though her mind raced. She'd seen this tactic before in other frontier towns. Criminals using seemingly legitimate business practices to establish control. But something about Carson's confidence, about the way his men had been studying her congregation, suggested this was part of a larger strategy. Through the windows, she caught glimpses of more riders surrounding the church. The Carson gang was sending a clear message about their power in Redemption Creek. But as Sarah rose from prayer to face whatever came next, she sent up one more silent petition. Not for deliverance from danger, but for wisdom in confronting it. Because Sarah Matthews carried secrets of her own, skills learned in a life before ministry. The Carson gang had chosen this church as their first public show of force, not realizing they'd targeted a shepherd who knew how to deal with wolves. Their laughter at a woman preacher would soon turn to something else entirely, once they discovered just who they were challenging. Sarah studied the document Carson held with practiced attention, noting the careful penmanship and official seals that marked territorial legal documents. During her years establishing frontier churches, she'd learned to recognize both legitimate and fraudulent property claims. The paper in Carson's hand appeared genuine, which made the situation even more concerning. According to these documents, Carson announced to the congregation, his cultured voice carrying authority, the mineral rights beneath this church property were legally transferred to Carson Mining Enterprises 3 months ago. The previous owner apparently failed to disclose certain aspects of the land deed. Sarah maintained her calm demeanor while analyzing the implications. The Carson gang wasn't just another group of outlaws. They were building a sophisticated criminal operation behind legitimate business facades. Their careful attention to legal documentation suggested connections reaching into territorial government. "Our mining operations require significant infrastructure," Carson continued, gesturing to the church building. "Unfortunately, this location has been designated for essential equipment. Of course, we're prepared to offer fair compensation for the congregation's relocation." Sheriff Parker stood slowly, his hand nowhere near his weapon, but his stance, conveying authority. "The town council approved this land for church use, Mr. Carson. Any mining claims would need their review." Carson's smile remained pleasant, but his eyes hardened. "I have here signed authorizations from 3 council members approving the change in land designation. All perfectly legal, I assure you." He paused meaningfully. "Though I'm certain the remaining council members will see the economic benefits our operation brings to Redemption Creek." Sarah recognized the subtle threat. She'd seen similar tactics in other frontier settlements, criminal enterprises using legitimate business operations to establish control, pressuring local officials through a combination of bribery and intimidation. But something about Carson's operation felt different, more sophisticated. "Your legal concerns are noted, Mr. Carson," Sarah responded, her voice carrying the same quiet authority that had served her in countless frontier conflicts. "However, this church serves as more than just a building. It represents the spiritual foundation of this community." Carson's men shifted in their pews, clearly expecting their leader to respond with force to this challenge. Instead, Carson's smile widened slightly. "Your reputation for dedication precedes you, Sister Matthews. Perhaps we could discuss this privately after the service. I'm certain we can reach an arrangement beneficial to all parties." Through the church windows, Sarah noted additional riders taking positions around the building. The Carson gang was making a show of force, while their leader maintained a veneer of civilized negotiation. But their tactical positioning revealed military precision. These weren't simple bandits. "My quarters behind the church would offer privacy for discussion," Sarah agreed, watching Carson's reaction carefully. His slight surprise at her acceptance confirmed her suspicion. He'd expected more resistance, hadn't yet figured out her full measure. Sheriff Parker began to object, but Sarah raised her hand slightly. "Faith teaches us to seek peaceful resolution, Sheriff. I'm sure Mr. Carson and I can have a productive conversation." As she dismissed the congregation, Sarah observed the complex dynamics unfolding. Carson's men maintained their intimidating presence while attempting to appear casual. The townspeople moved with nervous energy, casting worried glances at their preacher. But it was Carson's studying of her congregation that caught her attention. He seemed to be noting relationships, hierarchies, potential pressure points. In her small office behind the church, Sarah arranged her worn Bible on the simple desk while waiting for Carson. The room's single window offered a clear view of the street, where his men maintained their positions with professional discipline. Their formation suggested military training, another piece of the puzzle regarding Carson's operation. Carson entered alone, but left the door open, a power play demonstrating his confidence. "I admire what you've built here, Sister Matthews. 10 frontier churches established in as many years. Quite an achievement for anyone, especially a woman working alone in such dangerous territories." Sarah noted his detailed knowledge of her history. "The Lord's work provides strength beyond our mortal limitations, Mr. Carson." "Indeed." Carson placed the property documents on her desk. "Just as legal frameworks provide structure for civilized society, these documents represent progress, Sister Matthews. The transition of these territories from lawless frontiers to organized communities, through mining operations that require displacing established institutions." Sarah kept her tone curious rather than confrontational. Carson's eyes sharpened. "Natural resources are the foundation of economic development. Surely your previous frontier experience has shown you how prosperity follows industrial investment." Sarah allowed a small smile. "My experience has shown me many things, Mr. Carson, including how criminal enterprises often use legitimate business operations as cover for more profitable endeavors." The flash of surprise in Carson's eyes confirmed her suspicion. He hadn't expected such direct confrontation beneath her peaceful demeanor. His voice remained controlled, but a new edge crept in. "Serious accusations, Sister Matthews. One might worry such unfounded suspicions could damage Redemption Creek's economic prospects. One might similarly worry about the consequences of underestimating those they seek to intimidate," Sarah responded calmly. "Your men have military training, your operation shows sophistication beyond common outlaws, and your study of my congregation suggests you're mapping the town's relationships for systematic control." Carson stood slowly, his genial mask slipping slightly. "You're more observant than the typical frontier preacher, Sister Matthews. I suggest you pray carefully about your next actions. Even the most established shepherd can lose their flock under the right pressures." As he departed, Sarah watched his men fall into formation with practiced efficiency. The morning's events had confirmed her suspicions. The Carson gang represented something more dangerous than typical frontier outlaws. Their operation combined criminal ambition with military precision and business sophistication. But they'd made a crucial mistake in targeting her church, not realizing that Sarah Matthews's past held experiences far beyond frontier ministry. Their laughter at a woman preacher would soon transform into something else entirely, once they discovered exactly who they were threatening. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. During the week following Carson's visit to the church, Sarah Matthews maintained her normal routine while carefully observing the gang's methodical takeover of Redemption Creek. Each day revealed new aspects of their sophisticated operation, confirming her suspicions about the true nature of their criminal enterprise. Carson's men had established a visible presence throughout the town, their military precision evident in their coordinated patrols and strategic positioning. The gang now controlled key locations: the saloon, the freight office, and most notably, the telegraph office. Their surveillance of communications demonstrated a level of organization that went beyond typical frontier criminal operations. Sarah watched from her church's small study as another group of riders approached town, their disciplined formation matching Carson's other men. Through her window, she noted details others might miss. Their weapons weren't typical frontier armaments, but military-grade rifles. Their horses showed breeding that suggested government stock, and their tactical awareness indicated formal training. Sheriff Parker arrived at the church just before sunset, his young face showing the strain of recent events. Sister Matthews, 3 more council members signed Carson's mining agreements today. He's gaining control of every major property in town through seemingly legal means. The documents are likely legitimate, Thomas, Sarah responded, setting aside her Bible study. But they're being obtained through carefully orchestrated pressure. Carson's operation shows all the hallmarks of military intelligence tactics, identifying leverage points, exploiting vulnerabilities, establishing control through seemingly legitimate channels. The sheriff's expression showed surprise at her tactical assessment. You sound like you've encountered operations like this before, Sister Matthews. Sarah chose her words carefully, maintaining the calm demeanor expected of a frontier preacher while revealing just enough to gain the sheriff's trust. Before I found my calling to ministry, I had certain experiences that taught me to recognize sophisticated criminal enterprises. Carson's organization bears striking similarities to operations I've witnessed in other territories. Through her window, she watched Carson's men escorting a merchant to the bank, their formation designed to appear casual while maintaining perfect tactical coverage. They're not just controlling properties, Thomas. They're establishing a base of operations for something larger. The question is what they're planning to move through Redemption Creek. Sheriff Parker leaned forward, lowering his voice despite the empty church. I telegraphed the Territorial Marshal's office yesterday. The response was oddly delayed, and when it came, they simply acknowledged receipt, no indication of support or investigation. Because Carson likely has connections in the territorial government, Sarah concluded. His operation is too sophisticated to work without official protection. The delayed response suggests your telegraph was monitored, probably by his men controlling the office. Then we're alone in this, the sheriff concluded grimly. The town's too scared to resist, and help isn't coming from outside. Sarah's hand moved unconsciously to her belt, where the hidden derringer remained a constant reminder of her past. Not entirely alone, Thomas. I've dealt with operations like this before, though in a different capacity than my current calling. Before she could elaborate, the church door opened to admit Ellen Baker, one of her most devoted parishioners. The middle-aged woman's face showed barely controlled panic. Sister Matthews, they're taking my husband's freight business. Carson's men presented papers showing they're the majority shareholders, but David never sold any shares. Sarah exchanged glances with the sheriff. The gang's pattern was becoming clear. Systematic acquisition of key businesses through seemingly legitimate means, backed by the implicit threat of force. But their operations sophistication suggested these takeovers served a larger purpose. Did they show you the actual share certificates, Ellen? Sarah asked, her tone calming while her mind analyzed the tactical implications. Yes, all properly notarized from the territorial office, but David swears he never signed anything. Ellen's hands twisted her handkerchief. They're giving him until tomorrow to accept their generous offer to stay on as manager, or they'll reorganize the business entirely. Sarah's tactical assessment crystallized. Control of the freight business would give Carson's operation the ability to move significant cargo through Redemption Creek without arousing suspicion. Combined with their control of the telegraph office and growing influence over local government, they were establishing perfect cover for major criminal operations. Ellen, tell David to appear to accept their offer, Sarah advised. We need to understand their full operation before we can effectively oppose it. Sometimes faith requires us to be as wise as serpents while remaining as harmless as doves. After Ellen departed, Sheriff Parker studied Sarah with new understanding. You're not just a frontier preacher, are you, Sister Matthews? Your analysis of their operation, your tactical awareness, you've had training. Sarah met his gaze. Steadily, the Lord calls us to use all our gifts in service of justice, Thomas. Before I found my calling to ministry, I served in ways that taught me to recognize operations like Carson's. His men laugh at a woman preacher, not realizing their mockery blinds them to the threat I represent. The sheriff absorbed this revelation, thoughtfully. Carson's operation is too strong for direct confrontation. Even if you have training, they've got numbers, weapons, and territorial influence. Direct confrontation isn't always the answer, Sarah responded, years of experience, evident in her measured tone. Carson's operation depends on maintaining a legitimate appearance. The right pressure, applied precisely, can unravel even the most sophisticated criminal enterprise. As darkness fell over Redemption Creek, Sarah began formulating her strategy. Carson's gang had chosen her church as their first public target, believing a woman preacher would offer minimal resistance. Their laughter at her profession had prevented them from looking deeper, from recognizing the skills and experience she'd acquired long before finding her calling to ministry. That underestimation would prove to be their fatal mistake, once they discovered exactly who they'd challenged in their bid to control Redemption Creek. Sarah Matthews spent the next morning observing Carson's operation with the methodical attention she'd developed during her previous service. From her vantage point in the church's bell tower, she documented the gang's movements, noting their patrol patterns, communication methods, and hierarchy of command. Carson had established his headquarters in the Grand Imperial Hotel, the territory's most impressive building, which offered him both legitimacy and tactical advantages. His men maintained regular patrols through Redemption Creek streets, their routes demonstrating professional security training rather than simple intimidation. More concerning was their sophisticated system of lookouts positioned at key points throughout the town, including the telegraph office and the railway station. Through her brass spyglass, a reminder of her past life, Sarah noted details that confirmed her initial assessment. The gang's weapons were military issue, likely diverted from government armories. Their horses showed breeding that suggested cavalry stock. Most tellingly, their communication system utilized military hand signals, indicating many of these men had served together in organized units. Quite a view from up here. Sheriff Parker's voice came quietly from the tower stairs. Though I suspect you're seeing more than just the scenery. Sarah lowered her spyglass, turning to face the young lawman. Carson's operation has at least 30 men, organized in tactical units of 4. They're maintaining overlapping patrol zones with sophisticated communication protocols. This isn't just a criminal gang, it's a military-style operation using frontier crime as cover. The sheriff absorbed this analysis, clearly seeing Sarah in a new light. You mentioned having experience with operations like this. Care to elaborate on that experience? Before finding my calling, I served in ways that required understanding military tactics and criminal enterprises. Sarah replied carefully. Carson's operation bears similarities to others I've encountered, using legitimate businesses as cover for moving contraband, establishing control through seemingly legal means, maintaining military discipline within criminal operations. Through the tower window, they watched Carson himself emerge from the hotel, his bearing matching the military precision of his men. He paused to speak with several townspeople, his manner courteous and professional, maintaining the image of a legitimate businessman rather than a criminal leader. "He's different from typical outlaws," Sheriff Parker observed. "No public violence, no obvious threats. Everything's done through legal paperwork and business negotiations." Sarah nodded, her tactical assessment deepening. Because this operation isn't about typical frontier crime, they're establishing infrastructure for something larger. The systematic takeover of key businesses, the control of communications, the military-grade equipment. They're creating a distribution network disguised as legitimate commerce. A commotion in the street drew their attention. One of Carson's men was confronting David Baker outside his freight office, the discussion becoming heated. Sarah raised her spyglass, noting how quickly other gang members moved to maintain perimeter security while appearing casual to observers. "Their tactical response is immediate," she explained to the sheriff. "Watch how they're positioning themselves, establishing clear fields of fire while maintaining their legitimate appearance. These men have combat experience, likely cavalry, or frontier military units." The confrontation below ended without violence, but Sarah noted how the incident revealed Carson's tactical protocols. His men had responded with military precision while maintaining their cover as typical frontier law enforcement. "I need to understand their full operation," Sarah stated, her mind already formulating plans. "Their control of the telegraph office suggests they're monitoring all communications. Their takeover of the freight business indicates they're preparing to move significant cargo. But what exactly are they planning to distribute through Redemption Creek?" Sheriff Parker hesitated before speaking. "There's something else you should know. I've been tracking unusual shipments arriving at night, military-style crates being moved through Carson's mining operations. The manifests list mining equipment, but the security around these deliveries suggests something more valuable." Sarah's tactical instincts sharpened. Military-grade weapons would explain the sophistication of their operation. Carson's legitimate mining business provides perfect cover for moving illegal armaments. The question is, who's buying? The sheriff lowered his voice further. "I've noticed representatives from several frontier territories visiting Carson, always under the guise of mining investments, but their movements suggest military or government connections." Sarah began connecting the elements of Carson's operation. The systematic takeover of key businesses, the military precision of his men, the sophisticated security around night shipments, all pointed to a major weapons distribution network operating under the cover of legitimate frontier commerce. "We need proof," she concluded. "Documentation of their weapons shipments, evidence of their territorial connections, anything that would expose the true nature of their operation. But their security is professional. Direct investigation would be detected." The sheriff studied her thoughtfully. "You're not just planning to pray about this situation, are you, Sister Matthews?" Sarah allowed a small smile. "Prayer has its place, Thomas, but faith sometimes requires action, particularly when confronting systematic evil." Carson's men laugh. "At a woman preacher, believing their mockery of my calling blinds me to their operations. That underestimation provides tactical advantages they don't yet understand." Through her spyglass, she watched Carson's men maintain their professional patrol patterns, their military training evident in every movement. They had established impressive security protocols, but their dismissal of a frontier preacher's capabilities had left crucial vulnerabilities. Sarah's past experience had taught her that even the most sophisticated operations could be unraveled by precisely applied pressure. As the sun began setting over Redemption Creek, Sarah formulated her strategy. Carson's organization had chosen her church as their first public target, believing a woman of faith would offer minimal resistance. Their laughter at her profession had prevented them from looking deeper, from recognizing the skills and experience she'd acquired long before finding her calling to ministry. That tactical oversight would prove to be their fatal mistake once they discovered exactly who they'd challenged in their bid to control Redemption Creek. Sarah Matthews began implementing her strategy the following morning, starting with what appeared to be a simple pastoral visit to the Grand Imperial Hotel. Dressed in her modest black preacher's attire, Bible in hand, she projected the non-threatening image Carson's men had come to dismiss. Their subtle smirks as she entered the hotel's elegant lobby confirmed their continued underestimation of her capabilities. The hotel manager, Charles Wilson, greeted her with nervous deference, his eyes darting toward Carson's private suite on the upper floor. "Sister Matthews, how may I assist you this morning? I'm afraid Mr. Carson is occupied with business matters." "Actually, Mr. Wilson, I'm here to discuss establishing regular prayer meetings for your staff," Sarah responded, her voice carrying the gentle authority she'd cultivated during years of frontier ministry. "Times of transition can be spiritually challenging. I believe it's my duty to offer guidance to all members of our community." As she spoke, Sarah noted critical details about the hotel's security arrangements. Carson's men maintained protective positions throughout the lobby, their casual poses belying their tactical awareness. The staircase leading to the upper floors was never left unobserved, and communications between guards followed military protocols. "I'm not certain that would be appropriate, Sister Matthews," Wilson stammered, clearly caught between his respect for the church and fear of Carson's organization. "Our staff schedules are quite demanding with all the recent changes." Sarah pressed gently, maintaining her pastoral demeanor while gathering intelligence. "Perhaps I could at least tour the servant areas. Many of your staff attend my services, and I'd like to understand their working conditions better." The request produced exactly the response she'd anticipated. One of Carson's men detached himself from his position near the stairs, approaching with calculated casualness. "I'll escort Sister Matthews, Mr. Wilson. Mr. Carson would want us to show proper respect to the church." The guard, who Sarah had identified as former cavalry based on his bearing and tactical awareness, led her through the hotel's service areas. His attempt to control her movements revealed crucial information about the building's security protocols. Each restricted each subtle signal he exchanged with her provided the view. "Your men maintain impressive discipline," Sarah commented mildly as they passed another security checkpoint disguised as a routine staff area. "One might almost think they had military training." The guard's expression tightened slightly before he masked it. "Mr. Carson runs an organized operation, Sister Matthews. Proper security is just good business in the territories." Sarah noted how he'd shifted position to block her view of a particular storage room, the movement automatic and professionally executed. Indeed, though some might question why mining operations require such sophisticated security measures, before the guard could respond, James Carson's cultured voice carried from the staircase, "Sister Matthews, what an unexpected pleasure." He descended with calculated grace, every movement designed to project authority and control. "I trust you're not here to continue our discussion about the church property." Sarah turned to face him, presenting the image of a simple preacher, while analyzing every detail of his operational security. "The Lord's work extends beyond any single building, Mr. Carson. I'm here to minister to souls in need of guidance." Carson's smile remained pleasant, but his eyes showed new calculation. Your dedication to your calling is admirable, though one might question whether a hotel's service areas fall under pastoral jurisdiction. My jurisdiction extends wherever there are souls in need of ministry, Sarah replied calmly. Your operation has brought many changes to redemption. Greek, changes that create spiritual uncertainty. The subtle emphasis on operation caused Carson's tactical awareness to sharpen. His next words carried dual meaning. Change is inevitable in developing territories, Sister Matthews. The wise adapt to progress rather than resisting it. Sarah met his gaze with quiet confidence, letting him see just enough of her true capability. To plant seeds of doubt, wisdom takes many forms, Mr. Carson, as does resistance. Their exchange was interrupted by the arrival of a well-dressed gentleman who carried himself with military bearing. Carson's slight tension confirmed Sarah's assessment. This was an important contact, likely connected to their weapons distribution network. Sister Matthews was just leaving, Carson announced smoothly. Jenkins, please escort her out. As the guard led her toward the hotel entrance, Sarah noted every detail of the new arrival's interaction with Carson. Their formal greeting masked subtle signals that suggested shared military background. More importantly, the visitor's presence had triggered increased security protocols throughout the hotel. Outside, Sarah paused on the hotel's porch, appearing to adjust her bonnet while observing the building's external security. Carson's men had established professional surveillance positions covering all approaches. Their response to the visitor's arrival indicated regular protocols for protecting high-value contacts. Sheriff Parker waited in her church office, eager for her assessment. Learn anything useful? Carson's operation is even more sophisticated than we thought, Sarah replied, sketching a rough diagram of the hotel's security layout. They've established military-grade protocols around their headquarters. More importantly, they're receiving regular visits from officials with military connections. She detailed her observations about security positions, communication protocols, and restricted areas. The hotel's service areas have been modified to create secure storage and meeting facilities. They're running a professional operation disguised as frontier commercial development. The sheriff studied her tactical diagram with growing concern. How did you notice all these details from a simple pastoral visit? Sarah allowed a small smile. Carson's men see only a frontier preacher performing her duties. Their dismissal of my capabilities blinds them to my true observations. Sometimes, the best reconnaissance comes from being underestimated. Her morning's intelligence gathering had confirmed crucial elements of Carson's operation while revealing potential vulnerabilities. Their sophisticated security was designed to counter traditional threats, law enforcement, rival gangs, federal investigators. They weren't prepared for someone who could penetrate their organization through the very religious role they dismissed. As she reviewed her findings with the sheriff, Sarah began formulating the next phase of her strategy. Carson's operation had established impressive security around their weapons distribution network, but their continued laughter at a woman preacher had created exploitable weaknesses in their defenses. That tactical oversight would prove costly once they discovered exactly who was methodically dismantling their operation from within. Sarah Matthews knew that dismantling Carson's operation would require more than just intelligence gathering. Following her reconnaissance of the hotel, she began carefully identifying potential allies within Redemption Creek's community. Years of frontier ministry had taught her that even the most sophisticated criminal enterprises remained vulnerable to pressure from unified local resistance. The telegraph office provided her first opportunity. Under the guise of sending a routine church correspondence, Sarah observed Mary Winters, the longtime telegraph operator who now worked under Carson's supervision. The young woman's tense posture and careful movements suggested she operated under constant surveillance. but her subtle signals to Sarah indicated willingness to communicate. "These messages to our sister church in Silver Ridge are most urgent," Sarah explained, her calm voice masking the true purpose of her visit. "Though I understand your new management procedures may cause some delay." Mary's response carried deeper meaning beneath its professional tone. "All messages must be approved by Mr. Carson's office now, Sister Matthews. For security purposes, you understand, though perhaps we could discuss the church's communications needs after my shift." Sarah recognized the careful phrasing. Mary had found ways to bypass Carson's surveillance. Later that evening, in the safety of the church's small study, the telegraph operator revealed crucial information about the operation's communications network. "They monitor every message, official or personal," Mary explained, her voice barely above a whisper despite their secure location. "But they're particularly interested in communications with certain military outposts. Carson's men maintain detailed logs of any telegrams mentioning weapons shipments or troop movements." Sarah processed this intelligence with methodical precision. "Have you noticed patterns in their priority messages? Specific contacts or locations they watch most carefully?" "There's a regular correspondence with someone they call the Colonel. Those messages use military codes, but from what I've gathered, they're coordinating major shipments through the mining operations." Mary's hands twisted nervously in her lap. "They've also been monitoring communications from several territorial capitals." This confirmation of military connections strengthened Sarah's tactical assessment. Carson's operation wasn't just distributing weapons. They were coordinating with corrupt officials and military personnel across multiple territories. The sophistication of their network explained their confidence in operating so openly. David Baker, the freight office owner, proved to be another valuable ally. Under pressure from Carson's takeover of his business, he'd maintained detailed records of suspicious shipments. Meeting in the quiet of his home, away from the gang's surveillance, he shared critical intelligence about their distribution patterns. "The mining manifests list standard equipment," David explained, spreading documentation across his kitchen table. "But the security around certain shipments makes no sense for simple machinery. They clear the entire freight yard, post armed guards, and move the cargo only at night." Sarah studied the shipping records with practiced attention. "Are these night shipments coordinated with specific railway schedules?" "That's what's strange," David replied. "They often hold legitimate cargo to ensure their priority shipments move without observation. The losses to my regular customers are significant, but Carson's operation covers the damages generously. They're more concerned with controlling the shipping schedule than maintaining normal business." The pattern suggested sophisticated logistics planning. Carson's organization was using legitimate business operations to mask the movement of illegal weapons, carefully coordinating shipments to avoid attention from honest authorities. Ellen Baker, David's wife, added another crucial perspective. Carson's men maintain constant surveillance of the freight office, but they're not just watching the shipments. They keep detailed records of everyone who visits, everyone who asks questions. It's like they're mapping the entire town's relationships. Sarah recognized the intelligence-gathering technique. They're identifying potential threats and pressure points. Every business they control gives them more information about community connections they can exploit. Through careful pastoral visits and church activities, Sarah continued identifying allies throughout Redemption Creek. Each conversation revealed new aspects of Carson's operation, while building a network of trusted contacts willing to resist their control. Martha Chen, who ran the town's laundry, provided insights into the gang's personnel movements. "Their uniforms show military creases," she observed quietly during an evening prayer meeting. "And I've seen campaign ribbons hidden under their vests. These men served together somewhere before joining Carson's operation." Sarah's experience helped her interpret these details. The gang's military background explained their professional discipline and sophisticated tactics. More importantly, it suggested potential vulnerabilities. Men with military training often maintained certain codes of honor that could be leveraged against criminal enterprises. Even the saloon yielded valuable intelligence through Rebecca Turner, a server whose cheerful demeanor masked careful observation. "Carson's men drink, but never to excess," she reported during a discreet conversation in the church garden. They maintain strict rotations, and their private conversations often involve military terminology. Something big is being planned. They've been studying maps of the territory and discussing supply lines. Sarah compiled each piece of intelligence, methodically, building a comprehensive picture of Carson's operation. Their weapons distribution network was sophisticated, but their dismissal of Redemption Creek's civilian population had left gaps in their security. The gang's laughter at a woman preacher had prevented them from recognizing how effectively she could mobilize community resistance. As she coordinated with her growing network of allies, Sarah began identifying pressure points within Carson's organization. Their operation depended on maintaining a legitimate appearance while controlling key businesses. That need for public acceptance made them vulnerable to carefully coordinated community action. Sheriff Parker, meeting with Sarah to review her findings, marveled at her methodical approach. "You've built quite an intelligence network through simple pastoral work. Carson's men never suspect their operations are being mapped by church meetings and prayer groups." Sarah allowed a small smile. "They see only what they expect to see, a frontier preacher ministering to her congregation. Their mockery of my calling blinds them to the capabilities it provides. Sometimes the most effective resistance comes from those who are underestimated." The sheriff studied her growing documentation of Carson's operation with new respect. "You're not just gathering intelligence, are you? You're preparing for some kind of coordinated action against their organization. Carson's operation may have military discipline and sophisticated tactics," Sarah replied calmly. "But they've forgotten that true strength often comes from community bonds rather than force of arms. Their laughter at a woman preacher will prove costly once they realize exactly what kind of resistance they're facing." James Carson stood at his hotel window in the early morning hours, studying the quiet streets of Redemption Creek with growing concern. His carefully constructed operation had begun showing unexpected signs of resistance. What troubled him most wasn't the obvious opposition that he could handle with practiced efficiency. It was the subtle shifts in the community's behavior that suggested coordinated action beneath the surface. Sarah Matthews observed his tension from her position near the church, noting how Carson's professional demeanor had acquired an edge of uncertainty. His men maintained their disciplined patrols, but their increased frequency revealed concern about security vulnerabilities. More telling was their heightened surveillance of seemingly innocent community gatherings. "They're watching church activities more closely," Sheriff Parker reported during their morning meeting in Sarah's study. "Yesterday, they posted additional guards during the ladies' prayer meeting. Carson seems particularly interested in any group activities centered around the church." Sarah's tactical assessment deepened as she reviewed recent developments. "Because they're starting to recognize patterns they can't quite interpret. Their military training helps them identify traditional threats, but they're not equipped to understand community-based resistance." Her carefully coordinated network had begun affecting Carson's operation in multiple ways. Mary Winters at the Telegraph office had reported increased scrutiny of routine messages, suggesting the gang recognized potential security breaches in their communications. David Baker noted heightened security around freight shipments, indicating concern about surveillance of their distribution network. "Their reaction is telling," Sarah explained to the sheriff. "They're responding with increased military-style security, but that only highlights their activities to the community. Every additional guard, every suspicious search, every interrupted our gathering, it all reinforces the town's awareness of their true nature. Carson's morning meeting with his lieutenants displayed this growing tension. From her position in the church tower, Sarah observed their arrival at the Grand Imperial Hotel. Their formations maintained military precision, but their increased tactical awareness suggested concern about unseen threats. "Something's got Carson worried," Rebecca Turner reported later that day, her work at the saloon providing crucial intelligence. "His men are drinking less, talking more in private. They've started checking regular customers for weapons, even long-time residents they know aren't threats." Sarah recognized the tactical error in their response. Carson's operation had succeeded partly through maintaining a legitimate appearance, using professional courtesy to mask their criminal control. Their increasingly obvious security measures were damaging that careful facade. More concerning for Carson's organization was the subtle solidarity developing among Redemption Creek's residents. Martha Chen reported that customers now shared information about gang activities through careful conversations in her laundry. The Ladies' Aid Society, once focused solely on charity work, had become an effective intelligence-sharing network under the guise of planning church functions. Carson's men can't monitor every conversation, every small gathering, Sarah noted during an evening strategy session with her closest allies. Their military training makes them look for obvious resistance, armed opposition, direct confrontation. They don't understand how community bonds can undermine their control. The first clear warning sign for Carson's operation came through their business interests. Local merchants began finding creative ways to delay shipments, document suspicious activities, and share information about gang movements. Each small act of resistance was carefully calculated to maintain deniability while disrupting their carefully planned operations. Their supply chain depends on predictable business operations, David Baker explained, reviewing documentation of recent shipping delays. Every missed connection, every lost shipment, every delayed delivery, it forces them to adjust their distribution schedule. Those adjustments make their suspicious activities more obvious. Sarah's network had also begun affecting Carson's political influence. Mary Winters reported increased tension in communications with territorial officials. Their messages show frustration with local cooperation. Carson's control of official channels means less when the community finds other ways to share information. The operation's military discipline, once an advantage, began working against them. Their rigid protocols and formal procedures made them predictable, allowing Sarah's allies to anticipate and subtly disrupt their activities. More importantly, their professional demeanor cracked under the strain of facing an enemy they couldn't effectively engage. They're trained to counter direct opposition, Sarah explained to Sheriff Parker as they observed Carson's men conducting another suspicious night shipment. Their experience doesn't prepare them for resistance that comes through church meetings, social gatherings, and community cooperation. Carson's growing frustration became evident in his increased pressure on key community members. But each attempted intimidation only provided Sarah's network with more information about their operations while strengthening community resolve. "He's pushing harder because he knows something's wrong," Ellen Baker observed during a quiet conversation in the church garden. "But he can't identify the source of his problems. How do you fight an enemy that operates through prayer meetings and social calls?" Sarah recognized that Carson's organization had reached a critical point. Their sophisticated operation required both security and legitimacy to function effectively. The community's coordinated resistance, though subtle, was undermining both elements simultaneously. "They're starting to understand that they face real opposition," she told her core allies. but their training blinds them to its true nature. They laugh at a woman preacher leading prayer meetings, not realizing those gatherings are slowly dismantling their control of Redemption Creek. Carson's response would soon force a confrontation. His military experience would demand direct action against perceived threats. But Sarah's network had already laid the groundwork for turning such aggression against his operation. The gang's mockery of her position would prove to be their crucial mistake, once they discovered exactly how effectively a frontier preacher could mobilize community resistance against even the most sophisticated criminal enterprise. The confrontation Sarah Matthews had anticipated began unfolding on a quiet Wednesday morning. As dawn broke over Redemption Creek, Carson's men initiated a systematic search of key businesses, their military precision now edged with barely contained frustration. Their operations' carefully maintained facade of legitimate authority had started showing cracks under the pressure of community resistance. From her position in the church study, Sarah observed the methodical progression of Carson's response. His men moved in tactical groups of 4, maintaining professional protocols, while conducting increasingly aggressive inspections. Their actions revealed both their military training and their growing uncertainty about the threats they faced. They searched the telegraph office for over 2 hours, Mary Winters reported, her composed demeanor masking genuine concern. They examined every message log, every equipment cabinet, even the floorboards. Carson himself supervised, paying particular attention to any correspondence related to church activities. Sarah's tactical assessment noted the significance of their focus. They recognize that information is moving through the community outside their controlled channels, but their military background leads them to search for traditional security breaches rather than understanding how community networks function. The searches expanded throughout the morning. David Baker's freight office received especially thorough attention, with Carson's men examining shipping records and interrogating staff about recent delivery delays. Their questions revealed growing awareness of coordinated disruption to their distribution network. They're particularly interested in connections between businesses and the church, David explained during a discreet meeting in Sarah's study. Carson questioned me extensively about which employees attend services, which merchants participate in church functions. They're trying to map the relationships they've previously ignored. Sheriff Parker arrived with additional intelligence about Carson's response. They've doubled their patrols, established checkpoints at key intersections. More concerning, they've started maintaining detailed records of all community gatherings, especially those connected to religious activities. Sarah recognized the tactical shift in Carson's operation. They're applying military intelligence protocols to civilian activities, but their rigid approach only makes their surveillance more obvious to the community, undermining the legitimate appearance they need to maintain. The pressure escalated when Carson's men interrupted the Ladies' Aid Society meeting at Martha Chen's laundry. Their professional demeanor barely masked their frustration as they searched the premises and questioned attendees about their activities. They were particularly interested in our prayer lists, Martha reported later, her calm recitation carrying crucial intelligence. Carson's lieutenant spent considerable time examining the names of those we're supposedly praying for, cross-referencing them against some kind of document he carried. Sarah's experience helped her interpret this development. They're looking for patterns in community connections, trying to identify the structure of resistance they know exists but can't quite grasp. Their military training makes them search for organizational hierarchies rather than understanding informal community networks. The tension reached a new level when Carson himself appeared at the church that afternoon. His cultured manner remained intact, but Sarah noted subtle signs of strain in his bearing as he requested a private meeting. "Your pastoral activities have expanded considerably, Sister Matthews," he observed, studying her office with calculated attention. "Regular prayer meetings, charitable gatherings, frequent visits to local businesses. One might almost suspect a purpose beyond spiritual guidance." Sarah met his gaze with the calm confidence that had unnerved others before him. "The Lord's work often serves multiple purposes, Mr. Carson. Community bonds strengthen both faith and resistance to corrupting influences." The calculated emphasis on resistance caused Carson's professional mask to slip slightly. "Resistance can be dangerous in developing territories, Sister Matthews, particularly when it interferes with legitimate business operations. Your congregation might benefit from focusing more on heavenly matters than earthly concerns." "My calling requires attention to both spiritual and temporal welfare," Sarah replied, letting him see just enough of her capability to increase his uncertainty. "Those who underestimate the power of faith-based community often learn costly lessons about true strength." Carson's response revealed growing awareness of his tactical vulnerability. "Strength takes many forms in the territories, Sister Matthews. Your previous experience might help you appreciate how quickly situations can escalate when proper authority is challenged." The reference to her past confirmed Sarah's assessment. Carson had begun investigating her background, sensing there was more to the frontier preacher than he'd initially assumed. His organization's sophisticated intelligence capabilities had finally started looking beneath the surface of her role. As Carson departed, Sarah observed the subtle signals he exchanged with his men, directing increased surveillance of church activities. Their operation had shifted from dismissive awareness to focused concern about her influence in the community. "They're starting to recognize the threat," Sheriff Parker noted, watching Carson's men establish new observation posts around the church. "But they still don't quite understand its nature. Their military experience tells them to look for traditional opposition rather than seeing how community bonds can undermine their control." Sarah's network had pushed Carson's operation to a crucial decision point. Their need to maintain legitimate appearance conflicted with their growing desire to suppress community resistance. That tension would soon force them to either reveal their true nature or lose their grip on Redemption Creek. "They'll have to move decisively soon," she explained to her core allies. "Their military training won't allow them to ignore an increasing threat to their operation, but direct action against church activities will expose their criminal nature to the entire territory." Carson's organization had reached the limits of their sophisticated tactical approach. Their operation required both security and legitimacy, but Sarah's network had forced them to sacrifice one to maintain the other. Their mockery of a woman preacher had prevented them from recognizing this vulnerability until it was too late. That strategic oversight would prove fatal once they discovered exactly how effectively faith-based community resistance could dismantle even the most professional criminal enterprise. Carson made his decisive move against Sarah Matthews' influence during the next Sunday morning service. As her congregation gathered for worship, his men established a military-style perimeter around the church, their professional discipline now openly displaying aggressive intent. The operation's pretense of legitimate authority had given way to explicit show of force. Through the church windows, Sarah observed their tactical positioning with practiced attention. Carson had deployed his full complement of men, establishing overlapping fields of control that reflected their military training. More significantly, they had abandoned any attempt to disguise their weapons or intentions. "No one enters or leaves without authorization," Carson announced from the church steps, his cultured voice carrying calculated menace. "This building has been designated for immediate acquisition under Territorial Mining Authority. Sister Matthews, will conclude her service promptly and surrender all church records for official review. Sarah maintained her calm demeanor while assessing the tactical situation. Carson had positioned sharpshooters on adjacent buildings, their military-grade rifles visible as clear intimidation. His ground forces had established professional containment protocols, demonstrating their extensive combat experience. "Mr. Carson appears to have concerns about our worship activities," Sarah addressed her congregation with measured authority. "However, our service will proceed as planned. Those who wish to depart may do so, though I suspect our presence here serves greater purpose than we might initially understand." Her measured response created immediate tactical advantage. Carson's men had prepared for resistance or panic, their military training ready to contain typically civilian reactions. Instead, the congregation's calm determination under Sarah's guidance disrupted their operational expectations. Sheriff Parker, positioned near the rear entrance, provided discreet tactical assessment. "They've got at least 30 men deployed, all showing military training." Carson's apparently decided to sacrifice their legitimate appearance for direct control. Sarah recognized the strategic implications of Carson's choice. His operation requires both security and legitimate authority to function effectively. By resorting to open force against a church, he's undermining his own carefully constructed cover of legitimate business development. The confrontation escalated when Carson entered the church personally, flanked by his most trusted lieutenants. Their professional bearing barely masked growing frustration at the congregation's continued calm under Sarah's leadership. "This pretense has gone on long enough," Carson declared, his composure showing signs of strain. "Your interference with legitimate business operations cannot be tolerated. This building will be repurposed for essential mining activities, and all church records will be secured for official review." Sarah met his declaration with the quiet confidence that had unnerved others before him. "Your authority extends only as far as legitimate law allows, Mr. Carson. This congregation stands on firmer foundation than territorial mining claims." The tactical implications of her response registered immediately in Carson's expression. His organization had encountered resistance before, but always informs their military training could effectively counter. Sarah's faith-based community resistance operated outside their conventional strategic experience. "Your background suggests you understand the consequences of defying legitimate authority," Carson responded, revealing his investigation of her past. "Perhaps your current calling has caused you to forget certain tactical realities about force and control in frontier territories." Sarah allowed a small smile, letting him see just enough of her capabilities to increase his uncertainty. "My calling incorporates all aspects of my experience, Mr. Carson. Those who mistake spiritual authority for weakness often discover too late their error in judgment." The confrontation had drawn attention throughout Redemption Creek. Through the church windows, Sarah noted growing crowds of townspeople observing Carson's show of force. His operation's careful facade of legitimate business development was crumbling under the public display of military-style aggression against a place of worship. "You forced this situation, Sister Matthews," Carson declared, his frustration showing through his professional demeanor. "Your systematic interference with our operations, your coordination of community resistance. It ends today. This building will be secured, and your influence in this territory will be concluded." Sarah's response carried calm certainty that visibly unsettled Carson's men. "You've misunderstood the nature of both faith and community, Mr. Carson. Your operation depends on maintaining legitimate appearance while controlling through force, but you've now revealed your true methods to the entire territory." The tactical situation balanced on a crucial edge. Carson's military training demanded direct action to contain the threat Sarah represented, but his operation's sophisticated structure required maintaining at least minimal legitimate appearance to function effectively. Your previous experience should help you recognize the tactical disadvantage of your position, Carson stated, his implied threat clear. No amount of community support can match professional force when properly applied. Sarah's quiet response carried authority that reached beyond mere physical confrontation. You've chosen to demonstrate military force against a church, Mr. Carson. Consider carefully how that decision will be received throughout the territories. Your operation requires both fear and legitimacy. You cannot maintain both after this. Display. The strategic implications of her words registered visibly among Carson's men. Their military training recognized the tactical error of their position, even as their discipline maintained professional containment of the church. Sheriff Parker provided discreet tactical update about mounting public response, words spreading fast about Carson's show of force. His legitimate business facade won't survive armed confrontation with a congregation. Sarah's measured leadership had maneuvered Carson's organization into exposing their true nature. Their sophisticated operation required maintaining legitimate appearance to function effectively. By forcing them into direct military action against a church, she had undermined their essential foundation of public acceptance. The gang's previous laughter at a woman preacher had prevented them from recognizing this vulnerability until too late. That tactical oversight would prove fatal once they discovered exactly how effectively faith-based authority could counter even the most professional display of force. The confrontation at the church forced Carson's operation to reveal their military nature, but Sarah Matthews recognized this as merely the first phase of their inevitable response. As Sunday afternoon progressed, his men maintained professional containment of the church while establishing additional control points throughout Redemption Creek. Their tactical precision now openly displayed their extensive combat experience. They've secured every major intersection, Sheriff Parker reported during a discreet consultation in Sarah's study. Carson's men are conducting systematic searches of businesses connected to church activities. Their military protocols are fully visible now. No pretense of civilian law enforcement. Sarah's tactical assessment noted the strategic implications of their response. Carson's organization had abandoned subtlety for direct control, but this shift exposed crucial vulnerabilities in their operational structure. Their sophisticated distribution network required maintaining legitimate business connections throughout the territories. Each display of military force against civilian targets undermined these essential relationships. Word of their armed confrontation with our congregation has already reached neighboring settlements, Mary Winters confirmed, her position at the telegraph office providing crucial intelligence. Their legitimate business partners are demanding explanations. Several territorial officials have requested immediate clarification of the situation. Sarah recognized the pressure points this development created. Carson's operation depends on appearing as legitimate business development to facilitate their weapons distribution. Each hour they maintain military containment of a church damages their carefully constructed cover. The strategic tension became evident in Carson's next move. His men established formal headquarters in the Grand Imperial Hotel, transforming the elegant building into an obvious command center. Their professional protocols now openly reflected military structure rather than civilian business operations. They're consolidating their forces, Sheriff Parker observed, noting the tactical redeployment throughout town. Carson's pulling men from outlying positions to maintain direct control of central locations. He's sacrificing territorial coverage for immediate security. Sarah's experience helped her interpret this adjustment. Their military training emphasizes controlling key tactical positions, but concentrating forces around visible targets only highlights the extent of their armed presence. Each defensive position they establish further erodes their legitimate business facade. The pressure on Carson's operation mounted as community response evolved beyond simple observation. Merchants began closing their businesses, citing concern about military presence in civilian areas. The systematic shutdown of commercial activities threatened the basic functionality of Carson's distribution network. Their supply lines depend on normal business operations, David Baker explained during a careful assessment of the situation. Every closed shop, every suspended delivery, every interrupted transaction, it forces them to reveal military control, to maintain basic functions. Sarah's network had positioned Carson's organization into a strategic dilemma. Their sophisticated operation required both security and legitimacy to function effectively. Maintaining armed containment of the church protected their immediate tactical position, but undermined their essential cover of legitimate commerce. They're receiving priority messages from multiple territorial contacts, Mary Winters reported, her careful monitoring of communications revealing mounting pressure. Their business partners are threatening to suspend relationships if the situation isn't resolved. Military contacts are demanding explanation of armed deployment in civilian areas. The tension became visible in Carson's men as afternoon stretched into evening. Their professional discipline maintained tactical positions, but Sarah observed increasing strain in their execution of basic protocols. Military training had prepared them for direct confrontation, not sustained pressure from civilian non-cooperation. Their operational structure is designed for sophisticated distribution using legitimate cover, Sarah explained to her core allies. Each hour they spend displaying military force against civilian targets damages their essential network of business relationships. Carson must either withdraw armed containment or accept collapse of their legitimate facade. The strategic pressure intensified as regional newspapers began arriving in Redemption Creek. Their headlines focused on armed occupation of a frontier church, drawing unwanted attention to Carson's operation. The sophisticated distribution network that depended on avoiding scrutiny now faced territory-wide examination of their activities. Carson's legitimate business partners are discovering their connection to armed suppression of religious activities, Sheriff Parker reported, his law enforcement contacts providing crucial updates. Their carefully constructed cover of mining development is unraveling under public exposure of military-style operations. Sarah's measured leadership had maneuvered Carson's organization into an untenable position. Their sophisticated operation required maintaining legitimate appearance to function effectively. Each hour they spent displaying armed force against a congregation further degraded their essential foundation of business relationships. As night fell over Redemption Creek, Carson faced increasing pressure to resolve the situation. His military training demanded maintaining tactical control, but his operation's survival required preserving legitimate business connections. This strategic tension would force crucial decisions about their continued presence in the territory. The gang's previous dismissal of a woman preacher had prevented them from recognizing this vulnerability until too late. That tactical oversight would prove fatal once they discovered exactly how effectively faith-based community resistance could dismantle even the most sophisticated criminal enterprise. The strategic pressure on Carson's operation reached critical levels as Monday morning dawned over Redemption Creek. Their military containment of the church had maintained tactical control through the night, but the cost to their legitimate business operations increased with each passing hour. Sarah Matthews observed the mounting tension from her position in the church study, noting crucial changes in their organizational response. Carson initiated the morning with a systematic assessment of his operational status. His men maintained professional protocols as they reported positions and conditions, but Sarah recognized signs of strain in their military discipline. The sophisticated distribution network that required carefully balanced security and legitimacy now faced fundamental threats to both elements. Their business partners are suspending operations throughout the territory, Mary Winters reported. During a discreet morning consultation, the Telegraph Office has received formal notifications from 3 major mining corporations dissolving partnerships with Carson's enterprises. Their legitimate cover is disintegrating under public exposure of military-style operations. Sarah's tactical experience helped her interpret these developments. Carson's organization depends on appearing as standard business development to facilitate their weapons distribution. Each business partner that withdraws support further degrades their operational capabilities. Their sophisticated network requires commercial relationships they can no longer maintain. The strategic implications became evident in Carson's response to mounting pressure. His men conducted another sweep of Redemption Creek's business district, their military precision now carrying an edge of desperation. Their actions revealed growing awareness that tactical control alone could not preserve their operational structure. They're attempting to force merchants to maintain normal operations, Sheriff Parker reported, observing their systematic movement through town. But their military protocols only emphasize the coercive nature of their presence. Each attempt to preserve business functions through force further damages their legitimate appearance. Sarah's network had positioned Carson's organization into an accelerating cycle of operational collapse. Their sophisticated structure required maintaining legitimate business relationships to function effectively. The armed containment that protected their immediate tactical position steadily destroyed these essential connections. The pressure intensified when territorial newspapers arrived with expanded coverage of the situation. Their headlines focused on military occupation of civilian businesses, drawing unwanted examination of Carson's entire operational network. The careful balance of security and legitimacy that enabled their weapons distribution now faced comprehensive public scrutiny. Regional business leaders are publicly distancing themselves from Carson's enterprises, Mary Winters confirmed, monitoring crucial communications. Their legitimate partners recognize that association with armed suppression of religious activities threatens their own commercial relationships. The sophisticated network Carson constructed is unraveling through public exposure. The strategic tension became visible in Carson's next tactical adjustment. His men consolidated their positions around essential infrastructure, abandoning outlying control points to maintain core operational capabilities. Their military training emphasized preserving critical assets, but each defensive concentration only highlighted their armed presence in civilian areas. They're losing operational flexibility, Sheriff Parker observed, noting their tactical reorganization. Carson's forces can maintain immediate security, but they've lost the territorial coverage their distribution network requires. Their sophisticated operation is reducing to basic armed occupation. Sarah's measured leadership had maneuvered Carson's organization into exposing fundamental weaknesses in their structure. Their operation required extensive business relationships. To function effectively, each hour they spent displaying military force against civilian targets further degraded these essential connections throughout the territory. The pressure reached new levels when territorial banks began suspending financial relationships with Carson's enterprises. The sophisticated operation that depended on legitimate business transactions for basic functions now faced systematic isolation from commercial systems. Their careful construction of apparently legal operations disintegrated under public recognition of their military nature. Their operational funding is becoming restricted, David Baker reported, his position in the business community providing crucial intelligence. Financial institutions are freezing accounts connected to Carson's activities. Their sophisticated distribution network requires commercial transactions they can no longer conduct effectively. Sarah's strategic position strengthened as Carson's organization faced mounting operational constraints. Their military training prepared them for direct confrontation, but provided no effective response to systematic dissolution of their legitimate business structure. Each attempt to maintain tactical control through force accelerated the collapse of their essential commercial relationships. The turning point became evident in Carson's increasing isolation from legitimate business contacts. His careful construction of apparently legal enterprises had enabled sophisticated weapons distribution throughout the territories. Public exposure of military-style operations against civilian targets now threatened the foundation of this operational structure. As Monday progressed, Carson faced deteriorating strategic options. His forces could maintain immediate tactical control through military protocols, but this presence steadily destroyed the legitimate relationships their operation required. The sophisticated network he had constructed faced systematic dismantling through public recognition of its true nature. The gang's previous dismissal of a woman preacher's capabilities had prevented them from recognizing this vulnerability until too late. The tactical oversight would prove fatal as they discovered exactly how effectively faith-based community resistance could unravel even the most sophisticated criminal enterprise. Carson's operation reached its critical juncture on Monday afternoon, as the combined effects of public exposure and business isolation created irreparable stress on their organizational structure. Sarah Matthews observed the deterioration of their tactical position from her sustained presence in the church, noting how their military discipline began showing significant signs of internal strain. The first clear indication of organizational breakdown manifested in their communication protocols. Mary Winters, maintaining her crucial position at the telegraph office, reported a marked shift in the tone and content of Carson's messages to his territorial contacts. Their communications have lost previous professional precision, she detailed, during a secure consultation. Carson's exchanges with business partners now reflect increasing desperation to maintain operational relationships. Multiple legitimate enterprises are formally documenting termination of all associations with his organizations. Sheriff Parker provided tactical assessment of visible degradation in their military protocols. Their perimeter security shows inconsistent execution, he reported, observing their containment operations. Carson's men maintain professional positions, but their coordinated responses have lost previous efficiency. The sophisticated structure of their operation appears to be fracturing under sustained pressure. The strategic implications became evident in Carson's attempt to restore operational stability. His forces conducted another systematic sweep of Redemption Creek's business district, but their military precision had acquired obvious elements of desperation. Their actions demonstrated growing awareness that tactical control alone could not preserve their sophisticated distribution network. David Baker, whose position in the merchant community provided essential intelligence, reported accelerating dissolution of Carson's business relationships. Their operational structure is experiencing systematic isolation, he detailed. Financial institutions have suspended all transactions with their enterprises. The legitimate commerce their distribution network requires has become effectively impossible to maintain. Sarah's measured leadership had maneuvered Carson's organization into a position where their sophisticated operational structure began dismantling itself. Their careful balance of security and legitimacy, essential for effective weapons distribution, deteriorated under sustained public exposure of their military nature. The pressure intensified when territorial law enforcement began formal investigation of Carson's enterprises. Their previous protection through legitimate business appearance had dissolved under public recognition of armed operations against civilian targets. The careful construction that had enabled their weapons distribution now faced official scrutiny throughout the territory. Multiple law enforcement agencies have initiated coordination of investigative responses, Sheriff Parker confirmed through his professional contacts. Carson's operation has lost the legitimate cover that previously prevented official examination. Their sophisticated network faces systematic exposure across jurisdictional boundaries. The strategic tension manifested in visible strain among Carson's men. Their military training maintained tactical positions, but Sarah observed increasing uncertainty in their execution of basic protocols. The professional discipline that had characterized their operation showed clear signs of deterioration under sustained community resistance. Mary Winters reported crucial changes in their communication patterns. Their messages reflect growing internal discord, she detailed. Several of Carson's lieutenants have initiated independent contact with territorial authorities. Their organizational structure appears to be experiencing internal dissolution. The breaking point became evident in Carson's response to mounting operational pressure. His forces attempted to maintain tactical control through increased military presence, but each display of armed authority accelerated the collapse of their essential business relationships. The sophisticated network he had constructed faced irreversible degradation through public exposure. Sarah's strategic position strengthened as Carson's organization encountered accelerating systemic failure. Their military training provided no effective response to dissolution of their legitimate business structure. Each attempt to preserve operational capabilities through force only hastened the collapse of their essential commercial foundations. The pressure reached critical levels when territorial banks began formal documentation of suspicious transactions through Carson's enterprises. Their sophisticated operation, dependent on legitimate financial systems, faced comprehensive exposure of irregular patterns that suggested illegal weapons distribution. David Baker's commercial contacts provided crucial intelligence about the extent of their operational collapse. Their business infrastructure is experiencing complete isolation, he reported. Legitimate enterprises throughout the territory are formally severing all connections to Carson's operations. Their sophisticated distribution network has lost essential commercial foundations. Sarah's measured resistance had maneuvered Carson's organization into exposing fundamental weaknesses in their structure. Their operation required extensive legitimate relationships to function effectively. Each hour they spent maintaining military force against civilian targets further degraded these essential connections throughout the territory. The breaking point manifested in visible deterioration of Carson's command structure. His careful construction of apparently legal enterprises had enabled sophisticated weapons distribution across multiple territories. Public exposure of military-style operations against civilian targets now threatened complete collapse of this operational foundation. As Monday afternoon progressed, Carson faced increasingly untenable strategic options. His forces could maintain immediate tactical control through military protocols, but this presence steadily destroyed the legitimate relationships their operation required. The sophisticated network he had constructed faced systematic dismantling through public recognition of its true nature. The gang's previous dismissal of a woman preacher's capabilities had prevented them from recognizing this vulnerability until, too late, that tactical oversight would prove fatal as they discovered exactly how effectively faith-based community resistance could unravel even the most sophisticated criminal enterprise. The irreversible deterioration of Carson's operational structure culminated in a decisive confrontation late Monday afternoon. Sarah Matthews maintained her strategic position within the church as Carson's organization reached the point where their sophisticated network could no longer sustain the competing pressures of tactical control and legitimate appearance. Carson initiated the final phase by entering the church personally, his military bearing now carrying unmistakable tension. His most trusted lieutenants accompanied him, their professional discipline barely masking growing awareness of their untenable position. Sarah observed their tactical formation, noting how their previous confidence had been replaced by defensive positioning that reflected their operational uncertainty. Your systematic dismantling of our business relationships leaves us with limited options, Sister Matthews, Carson declared, his cultured voice carrying an edge of desperation. Perhaps it's time we discussed your previous experience in dismantling sophisticated operations. Your pastoral role clearly benefits from professional capabilities beyond religious leadership. Sarah maintained her measured composure, recognizing the strategic importance of this confrontation. My calling incorporates all aspects of my experience, Mr. Carson. Your organization's mistake was assuming tactical superiority while dismissing the strategic potential of faith-based community resistance. Sheriff Parker, positioned near the church entrance, provided discreet tactical assessment of their deteriorating situation. Carson's men are establishing final defensive positions, he reported quietly. Their military training emphasizes maintaining tactical control, but their operational structure has lost essential, legitimate foundations. The strategic implications of their position became evident in Carson's next declaration. Your interference with our distribution network has attracted unwanted territorial attention. Our business partners are suspending essential relationships. Your congregation's resistance has proven unexpectedly effective at undermining our operational capabilities. Sarah's measured leadership had maneuvered Carson's organization into exposing the fundamental weakness in their sophisticated structure. Their operation required maintaining legitimate appearance to function effectively. The armed containment that protected their immediate tactical position had systematically destroyed these essential connections. Mary Winters arrived with crucial intelligence about their final communications. Their messages reflect complete operational collapse, she reported discreetly. Territorial authorities are coordinating response to their exposed activities. Their legitimate business partners have initiated formal documentation of suspicious transactions. The pressure intensified as Carson's men reported deteriorating conditions throughout their network. Their professional protocols maintained tactical positions, but Sarah observed increasing strain in their military discipline. The sophisticated distribution system that depended on careful balance of security and legitimacy now faced irreversible dissolution. Your operation required both tactical control and legitimate appearance, Sarah explained calmly, her analysis reflecting deep understanding of their vulnerable position. Each hour you maintained armed force against this congregation further degraded your essential business relationships. Your military training provided no effective response to faith-based community resistance. Carson's response revealed growing recognition of their strategic failure. Our operational structure was designed to resist traditional opposition. Your systematic application of community pressure has exposed critical vulnerabilities in our distribution network. Perhaps we underestimated the strategic capabilities of a frontier preacher. The confrontation reached its decisive moment as Carson's lieutenants reported final dissolution of their legitimate business connections. Their sophisticated operation, dependent on maintaining apparent legitimacy, had been systematically dismantled through public exposure of their military nature. Your organization faces coordinated response from territorial authorities, Sarah stated, her calm certainty emphasizing their untenable position. Your business partners have formally severed all connections. Your distribution network has lost essential legitimate foundations. Faith-based community resistance has accomplished what armed opposition could not achieve. The strategic tension manifested in visible strain among Carson's remaining forces. Their military training maintained defensive positions, but Sarah observed increasing uncertainty in their tactical responses. The professional discipline that had characterized their operation showed clear signs of final deterioration. David Baker arrived with confirmation of their commercial isolation. Their business infrastructure has experienced complete dissolution, he reported. Financial institutions have suspended all transactions. Their sophisticated distribution network has lost all legitimate operational capabilities. Carson's final tactical assessment reflected recognition of their irreversible position. His forces could maintain immediate military control, but their operational structure required legitimate relationships they could no longer preserve. The sophisticated network he had constructed faced systematic dismantling through public exposure of its true nature. Your resistance has proven remarkably effective, Sister Matthews, Carson acknowledged, his professional demeanor showing final acceptance of their strategic failure. Our operation depended on maintaining legitimate appearance. Your congregation's coordinated pressure has exposed vulnerabilities we failed to anticipate. The gang's previous dismissal of a woman preacher's capabilities had prevented them from recognizing this critical weakness until too late. That tactical oversight proved fatal as they discovered exactly how effectively faith-based community resistance could unravel even the most sophisticated criminal enterprise. Sarah's measured leadership had achieved what armed opposition could not accomplish. Her strategic application of community pressure had systematically dismantled Carson's operation by exposing the fundamental contradiction between their military nature and required legitimate appearance. The arrival of territorial authorities transformed the tactical situation in Redemption Creek as Tuesday morning dawned. Multiple law enforcement units converged on the town, their coordinated response reflecting the comprehensive dissolution of Carson's operational protection. Sarah Matthews observed their systematic deployment from her position in the church, noting how their professional approach contrasted with Carson's deteriorating military presence. Marshal Thomas Richardson, the senior territorial law enforcement official, established immediate command presence upon arrival. His forces initiated methodical containment of Carson's remaining operational positions, their coordinated movement demonstrating extensive experience in dismantling sophisticated criminal enterprises. Their tactical approach emphasized controlled response rather than aggressive confrontation. We've received comprehensive documentation regarding illegal weapons distribution through Carson's enterprises, Marshal Richardson informed Sarah during their initial consultation. Your congregation's systematic resistance exposed crucial evidence of their operational structure. Multiple territorial agencies have confirmed suspicious patterns in their business transactions. Sarah maintained her measured composure while providing detailed assessment of Carson's operation. Their distribution network depended on maintaining legitimate appearance through seemingly legal business activities. Community pressure exposed the fundamental contradiction between their military nature and required commercial relationships. Sheriff Parker coordinated with territorial forces to establish effective containment protocols. Carson's remaining men maintained defensive positions, he reported during strategic consultation. Their military training emphasizes tactical control, but their operational structure has lost essential, legitimate foundations. They face coordinated law enforcement response without previous protection through business appearances. The Marshals' forces initiated systematic documentation of Carson's activities throughout Redemption Creek. Their investigation revealed sophisticated infrastructure designed to facilitate weapons distribution under cover of legitimate commerce. Each business location provided additional evidence of their extensive criminal enterprise. Mary Winters delivered crucial intelligence regarding final dissolution of their communication networks. Territorial authorities have secured complete records of suspicious messages, she confirmed. Their operational protocols left documented evidence of coordination with illegal weapons buyers. Their sophisticated distribution system maintained detailed transaction records. The strategic implications became evident as Marshal Richardson's investigation expanded. Carson's organization established impressive operational infrastructure. He noted during comprehensive assessment, their military precision maintained effective security protocols. However, their sophisticated network required legitimate appearance they could no longer preserve under public exposure. Sarah's measured leadership had achieved systematic dismantling of Carson's operation through precise application of community pressure. Their tactical superiority provided no effective response to faith-based resistance, she explained to territorial authorities. Each attempt to maintain military control further degraded their essential business relationships. Their sophisticated structure collapsed through exposure of its fundamental contradictions. David Baker provided detailed documentation of their commercial dissolution. Financial institutions have preserved complete transaction records, he reported during formal investigation. Their business activities demonstrated suspicious patterns that suggested illegal weapons distribution. Territorial banks maintained comprehensive evidence of irregular operations. The Marshals' forces secured Carson's command center at the Grand Imperial Hotel, discovering extensive documentation of their sophisticated enterprise. Their operational records revealed careful coordination of weapons distribution through seemingly legitimate business channels. Each secured location provided additional evidence of their systematic criminal activities. Your congregation's resistance proved remarkably effective, Marshal Richardson acknowledged during detailed review of secured evidence. Carson's operation required maintaining legitimate appearance through normal business relationships. Community pressure exposed critical vulnerabilities in their sophisticated network. Your strategic application of faith-based opposition achieved what direct enforcement could not accomplish. Sarah's tactical experience had recognized fundamental weaknesses in Carson's operational structure. Their sophisticated distribution system depended on careful balance of security and legitimacy. Public exposure of their military nature through sustained community resistance systematically dismantled their essential business foundations. The Marshals' investigation revealed comprehensive evidence of illegal weapons distribution throughout multiple territories. Carson's careful construction of legitimate appearance had enabled sophisticated criminal enterprise. However, their operational dependence on maintaining business relationships proved fatally vulnerable to coordinated community pressure. Your previous experience clearly contributed to effective resistance, Marshal Richardson noted during final consultation. Carson's organization demonstrated impressive tactical capabilities. However, their dismissal of faith-based opposition prevented recognition of critical vulnerabilities. Your congregation's coordinated pressure exposed fundamental weaknesses in their operational structure. The gang's previous mockery of a woman preacher's capabilities had prevented them from recognizing this strategic vulnerability until too late. That tactical oversight proved fatal, as they discovered exactly how effectively faith-based community resistance could dismantle even the most sophisticated criminal enterprise. Sarah's measured leadership had achieved systematic exposure of Carson's operation through precise application of community pressure. Their sophisticated network, dependent on maintaining legitimate appearance, collapsed through public recognition of its military nature. The strategic pressure that dismantled their enterprise demonstrated that faith-based resistance could overcome even professional tactical superiority. The systematic dismantling of Carson's operation continued throughout Tuesday as territorial. Authorities processed extensive evidence of their sophisticated weapons distribution network. Sarah Matthews observed the methodical investigation from her restored church position, recognizing how their coordinated law enforcement response reflected the comprehensive nature of her congregation's victory through faith-based resistance. Marshal Richardson's forces maintained professional protocols while documenting Carson's extensive criminal enterprise. Their investigation revealed sophisticated operational infrastructure, illegal weapons distribution under cover of legitimate business activities. Each secured location provided additional evidence of their systematic criminal organization. The scope of their operation exceeded initial assessment, the marshal reported during comprehensive review. Carson established impressive distribution networks through multiple territories. Their sophisticated structure utilized legitimate business relationships to facilitate illegal weapons movement. However, their operational dependence on maintaining commercial appearances proved fatally vulnerable to sustained community pressure. Sarah's measured leadership had achieved what direct enforcement could not accomplish. Their tactical superiority provided no effective response to faith-based resistance, she explained during formal documentation. Each attempt to maintain military control further degraded their essential business relationships. Their sophisticated network collapsed through exposure of its fundamental contradictions. Mary Winters provided detailed records of their communication protocols. Territorial authorities have secured comprehensive evidence through message logs, she confirmed. Their operational procedures maintain documented coordination with illegal weapons buyers. Their sophisticated distribution system preserved detailed transaction records that revealed criminal enterprise. The strategic implications became evident as Marshal Richardson's investigation expanded throughout Redemption Creek. Each business location previously controlled by Carson's organization yielded additional documentation of their illegal activities. Their careful construction of legitimate appearance had enabled systematic weapons distribution, while simultaneously preserving evidence of criminal operations. David Baker delivered extensive documentation regarding their commercial dissolution. Financial institutions maintained complete transaction records, he reported during formal investigation. Their business activities demonstrated suspicious patterns that suggested illegal weapons distribution. Territorial banks preserved comprehensive evidence of irregular operations that revealed criminal enterprise. Sheriff Parker coordinated with territorial forces to process secured evidence. Carson's remaining men have provided detailed statements, he confirmed during strategic consultation. Their military training emphasized tactical control without recognizing vulnerability to community pressure. Their operational structure collapsed through loss of essential legitimate foundations. The Marshal's investigation revealed sophisticated infrastructure designed to facilitate weapons distribution under cover of normal commerce. Carson's organization established impressive operational capabilities, he noted during comprehensive assessment. Their military precision maintained effective security protocols. However, their sophisticated network required legitimate appearance they could no longer preserve under public exposure. Sarah's tactical experience had recognized fundamental weaknesses in Carson's operational structure. Their sophisticated distribution system depended on careful balance of security and legitimacy. Public exposure of their military nature through sustained community resistance systematically dismantled their essential business foundations. Your congregation's resistance proved remarkably effective, Marshal Richardson acknowledged during detailed review of secured evidence. Carson's operation required maintaining legitimate appearance through normal business relationships. Community pressure exposed critical vulnerabilities in their sophisticated network. Your strategic application of faith-based opposition achieved systematic dismantling of their criminal enterprise. The investigation revealed comprehensive evidence of illegal weapons distribution throughout multiple territories. Carson's careful construction of legitimate appearance had enabled sophisticated criminal operations. However, their operational dependence on maintaining business relationships proved fatally vulnerable to coordinated community pressure. Your previous experience clearly contributed to effective resistance, the Marshal noted during final consultation. Carson's organization demonstrated impressive tactical capabilities. However, their dismissal of faith-based opposition prevented recognition of critical vulnerabilities. Your congregation's coordinated pressure exposed fundamental weaknesses in their operational structure. The gang's previous mockery of a woman preacher's capabilities had prevented them from recognizing this strategic vulnerability until too late. That tactical oversight proved fatal, as they discovered exactly how effectively faith-based community resistance could dismantle even the most sophisticated criminal enterprise. Sarah's measured leadership had achieved systematic exposure of Carson's operation through precise application of community pressure. Their sophisticated network, dependent on maintaining legitimate appearance, collapsed through public recognition of its military nature. The strategic pressure that dismantled their enterprise demonstrated that faith-based resistance could overcome even professional tactical superiority. The territorial investigation continued methodically, building comprehensive documentation of Carson's criminal enterprise. Each secured location revealed additional evidence of their sophisticated weapons distribution network. However, their operational dependency on maintaining legitimate business relationships had proved fatally vulnerable to sustained community pressure. The transformation of Redemption Creek following Carson's defeat demonstrated the lasting impact of faith-based resistance against sophisticated criminal enterprise. In the weeks following the territorial investigation, Sarah Matthews observed how her congregation's victory had strengthened community bonds, while establishing enduring protection against similar operations attempting to exploit frontier territories. Marshal Richardson's final report documented comprehensive dismantling of Carson's weapons distribution network. Their sophisticated operation established impressive infrastructure, he concluded during official assessment. However, their tactical superiority proved ineffective against coordinated community resistance. The strategic pressure applied through faith-based opposition exposed fundamental vulnerabilities in their operational structure. Sarah's measured leadership had achieved systematic change beyond immediate victory. Their dismissal of religious authority prevented recognition of critical weaknesses, she explained during community gathering. Each attempt to maintain military control through force accelerated collapse of their essential business relationships. Their sophisticated network dissolved through exposure of its fundamental contradictions. The lasting implications became evident as Redemption Creek restored normal operations. Local businesses, previously controlled by Carson's organization, established new protective protocols against criminal exploitation. Their coordinated response reflected deeper understanding of community strength against sophisticated tactical operations. Your congregation's resistance provided enduring lessons, Sheriff Parker noted during strategic consultation. Carson's operation demonstrated professional military capabilities. However, their dismissal of faith-based opposition prevented recognition of critical vulnerabilities. Your strategic application of community pressure established lasting protection against similar enterprises. Mary Winters reported significant changes in regional communication patterns. Territorial authorities have implemented enhanced monitoring protocols, she confirmed. Their operational procedures now include systematic assessment of suspicious business activities. Their coordinated response reflects lessons learned from exposing Carson's sophisticated network. David Baker described fundamental transformation in commercial relationships throughout the territory. Financial institutions have established comprehensive security protocols, he reported during community meeting. Their business operations now include careful evaluation of legitimate enterprises. Territorial banks maintain enhanced scrutiny of suspicious transaction patterns. The strategic impact extended beyond Redemption Creek as other frontier communities implemented similar protective measures. Their coordinated response reflected growing recognition that faith-based resistance could effectively counter sophisticated criminal operations attempting to establish control through legitimate business appearances. Your congregation's victory demonstrated enduring principles, Marshal Richardson acknowledged during final assessment. Carson's operation required maintaining legitimate appearance through normal commercial relationships. However, their tactical superiority proved ineffective against coordinated community pressure. Your strategic application of faith-based opposition established lasting protection throughout the territories. Sarah's measured leadership had achieved systematic change in frontier response to criminal enterprise. Their sophisticated network, dependent on maintaining legitimate appearance, proved fatally vulnerable to sustained community resistance. The strategic pressure that dismantled their operation demonstrated enduring strength in faith-based opposition. Your previous experience provided crucial insight, the Marshal noted during concluding consultation. Carson's organization established impressive tactical capabilities. However, their dismissal of religious authority prevented recognition of critical vulnerabilities. Your congregation's coordinated pressure exposed fundamental weaknesses that similar operations must now consider. The lasting transformation became evident as Redemption Creek strengthened community bonds that had enabled effective resistance. Local businesses established enhanced coordination to prevent criminal exploitation. Their systematic response reflected deeper understanding of faith-based strength against sophisticated tactical operations. Sheriff Parker reported fundamental changes in regional law enforcement protocols. Territorial authorities have implemented comprehensive protective measures, he confirmed during strategic review. Their operational procedures now include careful assessment of suspicious enterprises. Their coordinated response reflects lasting lessons from dismantling Carson's network. The enduring impact extended throughout frontier territories as communities recognized effective resistance against criminal operations. Their sophisticated networks, dependent on maintaining legitimate appearance, proved consistently vulnerable to coordinated faith-based opposition. The strategic pressure that had dismantled Carson's enterprise demonstrated lasting principles of community strength. Your congregation established enduring protection, Marshal Richardson acknowledged during final consultation. Carson's operation required maintaining legitimate business relationships. However, their tactical superiority proved ineffective against coordinated community resistance. Your strategic application of faith-based opposition transformed territorial response to sophisticated criminal enterprise. Sarah's measured leadership had achieved systematic change beyond immediate victory over Carson's organization. Their sophisticated network, dependent on careful balance of security and legitimacy, proved fatally vulnerable to sustained community pressure. The strategic resistance that dismantled their operation demonstrated enduring strength in faith-based opposition against criminal enterprise. The lasting transformation of Redemption Creek reflected fundamental lessons learned through faith-based victory over sophisticated tactical operations. Their coordinated resistance had established enduring protection against criminal exploitation while strengthening essential community bonds. The strategic pressure that defeated Carson's enterprise demonstrated that religious authority could effectively counter professional military capabilities. 1 month after Carson's defeat, Sarah Matthews stood at her pulpit in Redemption Creek's church, observing how the congregation had grown stronger through their unified resistance against sophisticated criminal enterprise. The pews that once held mocking outlaws now filled with community members whose shared victory had deepened their faith while establishing lasting protection against similar threats. Our triumph demonstrated enduring truth, Sarah addressed her congregation during Sunday service. Those who dismissed religious authority as weakness discovered instead its fundamental strength. Our faith-based resistance proved more powerful than tactical superiority, dismantling sophisticated operation through coordinated community pressure. Marshal Richardson, attending the service before his departure, provided final assessment of their victory's lasting impact. Your congregation achieved systematic change throughout frontier territories, he confirmed during quiet conversation. Carson's organization established impressive military capabilities. However, their dismissal of religious authority prevented recognition of critical vulnerabilities that similar operations must now consider. The transformation of Redemption Creek reflected deeper understanding of community strength against criminal exploitation. Local businesses previously controlled by Carson's enterprise had established enhanced protective measures through coordinated response. Their systematic protocols demonstrated lasting lessons learned from faith-based victory. Your strategic application of community pressure provides enduring example, Sheriff Parker noted during post-service consultation. Carson's operation required maintaining legitimate appearance through normal commercial relationships. However, their tactical superiority proved ineffective against coordinated resistance. Your congregation's victory established fundamental principles of protection. Mary Winters reported significant changes in regional communication patterns following their triumph. Territorial authorities maintain enhanced monitoring protocols, she confirmed during church gathering. Their operational procedures now include systematic assessment of suspicious enterprises. Their coordinated response reflects lasting lessons from exposing sophisticated criminal networks. David Baker described fundamental transformation in commercial relationships throughout frontier territories. Financial institutions have implemented comprehensive security measures, he reported to assembled community members. Their business operations include careful evaluation of legitimate enterprises. Territorial banks maintain enhanced scrutiny of suspicious transaction patterns that might indicate criminal activity. The strategic impact extended beyond immediate victory, as other frontier communities recognized effective resistance against sophisticated operations. Their coordinated response reflected growing understanding that faith-based opposition could successfully counter criminal enterprises attempting to establish control through legitimate business appearances. Your congregation's achievement demonstrated enduring principles, Marshal Richardson acknowledged during farewell address. Carson's organization established impressive tactical capabilities. However, their dismissal of religious authority prevented recognition of critical vulnerabilities. Your strategic application of faith-based resistance transformed territorial response to sophisticated criminal enterprise. Sarah's measured leadership had achieved systematic change in frontier protection against similar operations. Their sophisticated networks, dependent on maintaining legitimate appearance, proved consistently vulnerable to coordinated community pressure. The strategic resistance that dismantled Carson's enterprise demonstrated lasting strength in faith-based opposition. Your previous experience provided crucial insight, the Marshal noted during final consultation. Carson's operation required careful balance of security and legitimacy. However, their tactical superiority proved ineffective against coordinated community resistance. Your congregation's victory established enduring principles of protection throughout territories. The lasting transformation became evident as Redemption Creek strengthened community bonds that had enabled effective resistance. Local businesses maintained enhanced coordination to prevent criminal exploitation. Their systematic response reflected deeper understanding of faith-based strength against sophisticated tactical operations. Sheriff Parker reported fundamental changes in regional law enforcement protocols following their triumph. Territorial authorities have implemented comprehensive protective measures, he confirmed during strategic review. Their operational procedures now include careful assessment of suspicious enterprises. Their coordinated response reflects lasting lessons from dismantling Carson's network. The enduring impact extended throughout frontier territories as communities recognized effective resistance against criminal operations. Their sophisticated networks, dependent on maintaining legitimate appearance, proved consistently vulnerable to coordinated faith-based opposition. The strategic pressure that had dismantled Carson's enterprise demonstrated lasting principles of community strength. Your congregation established enduring protection, Marshal Richardson acknowledged during final service attendance. Carson's operation required maintaining legitimate business relationships. However, their tactical superiority proved ineffective against coordinated community resistance. Your strategic application of faith-based opposition transformed territorial response to sophisticated criminal enterprise. Sarah's measured leadership had achieved systematic change beyond immediate victory over Carson's organization. Their sophisticated network, dependent on careful balance of security and legitimacy, proved fatally vulnerable to sustained community pressure. The strategic resistance that dismantled their operation demonstrated enduring strength in faith-based opposition against criminal enterprise. As Sarah concluded the service, she observed how their triumph had transformed both congregation and community. The pews that once held mocking outlaws now contained strengthened faithful whose coordinated resistance had established lasting protection. Their victory demonstrated that religious authority, when properly applied through unified community action, could effectively counter even the most sophisticated criminal operations. 1 year after Carson's defeat, Sarah Matthews stood on the steps of Redemption Creek's church, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. The town had flourished in the aftermath of their victory, its growth now protected by the enduring strength of faith-based community, bonds that had dismantled sophisticated criminal enterprise. Your congregation's triumph continues providing inspiration, Sheriff Parker noted, joining her on the church steps. Word of our victory spreads throughout the territories. Communities facing similar threats now recognize that faith-based resistance can overcome even professional military operations. Sarah observed the evening activities of Redemption Creek with quiet satisfaction. The streets that once held Carson's armed patrols now bustled with legitimate commerce. Local businesses previously controlled by his organization had established thriving operations based on honest trade rather than criminal exploitation. The transformation extends beyond our immediate community, Mary Winters reported, approaching from the telegraph office. Territorial authorities regularly share our experience as model response to sophisticated criminal enterprises. Our strategic application of faith-based resistance has established enduring principles of protection. David Baker arrived with confirmation of lasting commercial changes. Financial institutions throughout the territory have implemented enhanced security protocols, he explained. Their business operations now include systematic assessment of suspicious enterprises. Our victory demonstrated effective methods for preventing criminal exploitation through legitimate commerce. The strategic impact of their triumph had reached far beyond Redemption Creek's borders. Communities throughout the frontier territories had recognized that coordinated faith-based opposition could successfully counter criminal operations, attempting to establish control through legitimate business appearances. Your congregation's achievement provided crucial lessons, Marshal Richardson had noted in his final report, now preserved in territorial records. Carson's organization established impressive tactical capabilities. However, their dismissal of religious authority prevented recognition of critical vulnerabilities that similar operations must now consider. Sarah's measured leadership had achieved systematic change in frontier response to sophisticated criminal enterprise. Their coordinated resistance demonstrated that faith-based community pressure could effectively dismantle operations dependent on maintaining legitimate appearance while employing military-style tactics. The lasting impact becomes more evident with each passing month, Sheriff Parker observed. Criminal organizations attempting similar operations now face coordinated community resistance based on principles established through our victory. Their sophisticated networks prove consistently vulnerable to faith-based opposition. The transformation of Redemption Creek reflected deeper understanding of community strength against criminal exploitation. Local businesses maintained enhanced protective measures through coordinated response. Their systematic protocols demonstrated lasting lessons learned from faith-based victory. Mary Winters reported continuing changes in regional communication patterns. Territorial authorities have established comprehensive monitoring systems, she confirmed. Their operational procedures include careful assessment of suspicious enterprises. Their coordinated response reflects enduring principles from exposing sophisticated criminal networks. The strategic impact extended throughout frontier territories as communities implemented similar protective measures. Their coordinated response reflected growing recognition that faith-based resistance could effectively counter criminal operations attempting to establish control through legitimate business appearances. Your congregation's victory transformed territorial response to sophisticated criminal enterprise, Marshal Richardson's final assessment had concluded. Carson's operation required maintaining legitimate appearance through normal commercial relationships. However, their tactical superiority proved ineffective against coordinated community pressure. Sarah's measured leadership had achieved systematic change beyond immediate triumph over Carson's organization. Their sophisticated network, dependent on careful balance of security and legitimacy, proved fatally vulnerable to sustained community resistance. The strategic pressure that dismantled their operation demonstrated enduring strength in faith-based opposition. As darkness settled over Redemption Creek, Sarah reflected on their journey from initial confrontation to lasting victory. The church that Carson's men had once mocked now stood as symbol of community strength against criminal exploitation. Their coordinated resistance had established enduring protection while demonstrating that religious authority could effectively counter professional military capabilities. Our triumph continues providing inspiration, she addressed her gathered allies. Those who dismissed faith-based resistance as weakness discovered instead its fundamental strength. Our victory demonstrated that coordinated community pressure can dismantle even the most sophisticated criminal operations. The transformation of Redemption Creek stood as testament to enduring principles established through their faith-based victory. The strategic resistance that defeated Carson's enterprise had strengthened essential community bonds while providing lasting protection against similar threats to frontier territories. As Sarah Matthews concluded her evening prayers in Redemption Creek's church, now a symbol of triumph over sophisticated criminal enterprise, a young woman entered seeking guidance. Her story echoed familiar themes. Another frontier town facing pressure from organized criminals attempting to establish control through seemingly legitimate business operations. "We heard about your victory over Carson's organization," the visitor explained, hope evident in her voice. "Our community faces similar threats from operations using legitimate commerce to mask criminal activities. They dismiss our church's influence, just as Carson's men once mocked your authority." Sarah recognized the profound impact their triumph continued generating throughout frontier territories. "Their dismissal of religious authority often proves their fundamental weakness," she explained, sharing crucial insights from their victory. "Sophisticated operations require maintaining legitimate appearance while employing tactical control. That dependency creates vulnerability to coordinated faith-based resistance." Sheriff Parker, joining their conversation, provided additional perspective on their lasting achievement. "Carson's organization demonstrated impressive military capabilities," he noted. "However, their tactical superiority proved ineffective against unified community pressure. Your congregation's strategic resistance established enduring principles of protection that continue inspiring similar communities." Mary Winters arrived with latest confirmation of their victory's expanding influence. "Territorial authorities regularly receive inquiries about your methods," she reported. "Communities facing sophisticated criminal operations seek to understand how faith-based resistance successfully dismantled Carson's network. Your strategic application of community pressure provides ongoing inspiration." The transformation of Redemption Creek stood as living testimony to their triumph's lasting impact. Local businesses previously controlled by Carson's organization now thrived through legitimate commerce, their success protected by enhanced security protocols developed through coordinated community response. Your congregation's victory transformed territorial understanding of effective resistance, David Baker observed, joining the evening gathering. "Financial institutions throughout the frontier have implemented comprehensive protective measures based on principles established through your strategic opposition. Criminal enterprises can no longer easily exploit legitimate business relationships." Sarah shared with her visitor the fundamental lessons learned through their faith-based triumph. Carson's operation depended on maintaining careful balance between tactical control and legitimate appearance, she explained. Their dismissal of religious authority prevented recognition of critical vulnerabilities. Coordinated community pressure exposed fundamental weaknesses in their sophisticated structure. The strategic impact of their victory had reached far beyond immediate success against Carson's organization. Communities throughout frontier territories now recognized that faith-based resistance could effectively counter criminal operations attempting to establish control through legitimate business appearances. "The lasting transformation continues expanding," Sheriff Parker noted. "Criminal enterprises attempting similar operations face coordinated opposition based on principles demonstrated through your triumph. Their sophisticated networks consistently prove vulnerable to strategic application of community pressure." Mary Winters reported ongoing changes in regional response to criminal threats. "Territorial authorities maintain enhanced monitoring protocols inspired by your methods," she confirmed. Their operational procedures include systematic assessment of suspicious enterprises. Your victory established enduring principles for protecting frontier communities. The visitor absorbed these insights, with growing hope for her own community's struggle. Your triumph provides crucial guidance for our resistance, she acknowledged. Carson's men laughed at a woman preacher, never recognizing how effectively faith-based opposition could dismantle their sophisticated operation. Sarah's measured leadership had achieved systematic change beyond immediate victory over criminal enterprise. Their coordinated resistance demonstrated that religious authority, properly applied through unified community action, could successfully counter even professional military capabilities. Our triumph continues offering inspiration, she assured a visitor. Those who dismiss faith-based resistance as weakness often discover instead its fundamental strength. Your community's unified opposition can effectively dismantle sophisticated operations through strategic application of coordinated pressure. As evening settled over Redemption Creek, Sarah watched her visitor depart with renewed determination. The church that Carson's men had once mocked now stood as beacon of hope for communities facing similar threats, its victory demonstrating enduring principles of effective resistance against criminal exploitation. The transformation of their frontier town reflected deeper understanding of community strength against sophisticated operations. Local businesses maintained enhanced protective measures through coordinated response. Their systematic protocols demonstrated lasting lessons learned from faith-based victory. Your congregation's achievement established enduring protection. Marshal Richardson's final assessment had concluded. Carson's operation required maintaining legitimate appearance through normal commercial relationships. However, their tactical superiority proved ineffective against coordinated community pressure. Your strategic application of faith-based opposition transformed territorial response to sophisticated criminal enterprise. Sarah's church stood as living testament to truth revealed through their triumph, that religious authority, when properly applied through unified community action, could effectively counter even the most sophisticated criminal operations. Their victory continued, providing inspiration throughout frontier territories, demonstrating enduring principles of successful resistance against those who would exploit legitimate commerce for criminal purpose. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.